It's podcast in space.
Space.
And then it bounces off the satellites and it comes back, and here it is, right where it began, in a empty bedroom and I don't know, where are you at these days? Where are you recording from?
I am in an office. I'm in an office space right now. I'm sitting,
There you go.
I call it an office, but
That's what
I'm
we
really,
call ours that too.
I'm really glorifying it. Technically, it's supposed to be an office, but it is like at least 60% filled with my son's books and toys. Um, so in calling it an office, it's really just his play place that he lets me have a corner in once every 2 weeks. So that's
Aw,
about
thanks,
it.
Henry.
Yeah, he is kind-hearted. He is unaware that he is sharing, but I appreciate that he is.
Well, welcome one and all, for those returning and for the newcomers. This is Force Cult. Yes, that's right. It's a Star Wars podcast that we've been doing for 190 episodes now. So woo-woo.
That's a few, man.
It's a fair few. Um, this week, well, I mean, as any week, we talked about a whole lot of stuff. We were diving into the Clone Wars with it returning, and it has returned. So we will be returning to our rewatch of that shortly. But since it has started back up, we'll talk a bit about that this week. But also, there was some other awesome announcements concerning the future of the franchise. I think is something we've all been a little, I don't want to say unsure of, just kind of like, where is it? Where is the future of Star Wars?
The future is in the past, baby.
Yeah, man. Which I actually had that super weird thought. So I just finished Force Collector, the part of the Journey to the Rise of Skywalker books,
Uh-huh.
which is pretty loosely connected. It actually, in a way, sort of was a little bit of what I had maybe thought it would be. I think when we talked about the book when it first got announced, was like, maybe this is a person who, you know, realizes they had the Force and they try to find Luke Skywalker, to train with him, only to realize that, he's now abandoned his new Jedi Academy. And
Yeah.
to an extent, that kind of happens. The book is about a Force sensitive kid who has psychometry. For those unaware, psychometry is when a Force sensitive person can touch an object and it like shows them moments, important in the life of that object. Quinlan Voss has that ability. Recently in Jedi Fallen Order, the main character Cal Kestis can do that, and in this book, it's important as well. It manifests in this character very, almost painfully at first. Like, it straight up knocks him out. Like, it incapacitates him after he has a vision.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it's very, very intense. And the book is about him like kind of learning to hone it. Anyway, he comes to find out that he is the great grandchild of a Jedi that actually left the Jedi Order pre-Order 66. And when all that went down, he was actually unaware of how that occurred. So he had lived all these many years thinking that the Jedi did betray the Republic, as many people in the galaxy did, because that was the fake news that was presented to them.
That's what they want you to think. That's what
Yeah.
Sheev was hoping for.
And so overall, it's a pretty good book. It kind of reminded me of like a Harry Potter book in a way, like just the kind of character dynamics and like solving one little puzzle to get to the other, and these kids, kind of having to like defy the adults to go on their own adventure and learn things.
And the
Um,
redheads were the poor people.
no
The
redheads, but there
oh
are some
no,
Mary
that's
Allens.
okay.
um, and
Which I will say, just as an aside, a little bit unnecessary from J.K. Rowling, in my opinion. A
what
little low
to
hanging fruit
target
just to make the redhead people the poor
target
people.
gingers as
Yeah,
the impoverished.
I expected out of South Park, but I feel like J.K. Rowling's better than that.
Gingers don't have souls. Uh, so the really roundabout way that I was trying to get to this is um, by the end of the book, I'd check it out. It's cool. The kid kind of realizes that he's not as force sensitive as, say, like a Jedi is. Like he doesn't have the aptitude to, like, control people's mind. He even tries like a Jedi mind trick and stuff in it. And, um, doesn't have that, but he realizes, like, I've got this power to do something with it, and realizes that he basically needs to be a um, kind of storyteller to the galaxy. And this takes place shortly before Force Awakens, because in the book he actually visits Jakku and he boards the Millennium Falcon and touches the training probe, and sees Luke and stuff. He has multiple visions of Luke and Anakin and Obi-Wan. So anyway, by the end, he's like basically saying, like, I'm going to help tell the story of the Jedi and whatnot, and make sure that the past is preserved. And at the end, he uses the phrase, um, a long time ago. And I got to this weird perception of, like, the the further we keep moving along, like, the timeline in Star Wars, the closer we're getting. We're technically closing the gap from when we first learned of Star Wars to when it actually would have existed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's weird.
Is a crazy thought. I know that was a very, like, long tangent to get to that idea, but yeah, it was just kind of this weird thought. I was like, yes, as our characters get older, we're getting older, but the time when we met them is closer. It's bizarre, but
That's really unusual to think about it that way. Like, yeah, what would if if this is the story from a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, in that galaxy now, what would
it
be
was a
going
less
on?
time ago. Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what would it be? That's not really something I've ever like spent time thinking about. I've always been more either removed from that or more interested in, um, like Old Republic kind of stuff, which I
Yeah.
don't think is uncommon, since that's kind of considered to be like the golden age of
Hmm.
either the Sith or the Jedi or the Republic, what have you. But yeah, to kind of look at what it would be if this was like leading toward some concurrent storyline, that would be really interesting and something that I haven't really considered before. I'm sure people have,
That would be a wacky way
but
to, like, make a time jump in the story of things and, like, come to our current day. That would be weird. Or maybe their galaxy has been, just as our sun will die, perhaps theirs has, and
you
so
better
life
not
is.
say that out loud. This is
you heard,
no,
you heard it right
stop
here,
it,
folks. I just
stop
killed
it.
everyone we loved.
The way that so if they do a like a concurrent timeline to what we're experiencing now, basically
Hmm.
what they would need to do is to have our like messages that we're sending out from like the SETI
Oh yeah,
locations or something like that, um, show up on the HoloNet at some point or something, and like people pick up on it on the outer rim,
well, we did
and
start, didn't
that
we?
would be fun.
Apparently we started, scientists said they were, like, they've been receiving some weird, like, number
Yeah,
sequence.
there's a periodic like radar kind of burst that they're getting.
Oh,
it's a pulse, I believe, is what they call it. And the explanation is that they, have no idea what it is, but there are conceivably theories out there that, there could be, one, because it takes, like it's recurrent over the course of like 14 days or something like that.
Yeah.
And so the theory is that there's like a body of matter, like, a galaxy or a huge star or something like that, that is blocking the burst. It's from like
Hmm.
a quasar or something. I don't know. I forget exactly what the article writes. Is, like some like theoretically possible, reasons for this. It's on um, a timeline that's predictable because it's something orbiting something else, or something getting in the way in a way that makes sense with the gravitational pull or something. So they're not saying it is like, oh my gosh, it's aliens, but
Yeah.
there's always got to be that little voice in the back of your head that's like, wait a second,
But it could be.
is it aliens?
Yeah. Is it the Star Wars people?
Is it R2 who's still kicking it?
Yeah. So you kind of naturally transitioned us to um, the big news that we got this week,
Hey, big news.
because you talked about like the old republic being that the golden age. Well, kind of technically, we've been told that there is a golden age in the new canon. Yes, the High Republic.
Not having to do with the legalization of marijuana in the United States that is currently
All,
ongoing.
although I have a whole other tangent I'm gonna get to here in a
Oh
bit
no.
once we discuss the meat and potatoes of the High Republic here. Um, so yes, the High Republic is to take place roughly 200 years prior to the events of the Phantom Menace, um, which oh, I should have said this was previously known as Project Luminous for people who maybe aren't keeping super attuned to the anything other than the crude matter that they are. Um, but this right now is just comics and novels is what
Oh
this is
baby. Bring me
sticking
some
to.
novels.
Which yeah, I was like, oh man, this is Jip's thing right here. Like he is gonna eat this up.
I'm going to literally eat
Getting
these books. Get
yeah,
ready.
I need sustenance in the
It's going to be
form
a
of a
weird unboxing
book.
video when I start eating the books.
I can't eat my Kindle, but I'll try. Um, so yeah, we've got a lineup of some comics, YA novels, and some books that I guess so far we've got Claudia Gray, who a lot of people really love the writings of her in the Star Wars universe. She's writing a book called Into the Dark, YA novel, and then we've got um, another one from Justina Ireland. She's done some other writing for Star Wars called A Test of Courage. And then we've had previous like Star Wars Adventures comics um, over the years. So we're getting another series that's basically just called Star Wars Adventures, The High Republic. Um, and then um, one that's just called The High Republic, not part of the Adventure series. And then another book called Light of the Jedi, which
An
will be
adult
by
novel. I'm pretty sure that
yes.
one's going to be just basically um, 50 Shades of Grey, but just with Star Warsy names.
50 Shades of Grey Jedi.
I think that's what adult novel means. I don't know.
Yes, that's what I always assume when I read a adult novel or a what is it, a adult comic book of sorts. That's what I anticipate. So Jip, I don't know if you watched the trailer the kind of launch trailer of things. Um, so they've talked about like, this is the golden age of the Jedi, and obviously we're in a time where the Sith are, you know, they're there, but as we know it, the Sith don't make um, they don't resurface until the Phantom Menace,
Yeah,
publicly.
they're in a period of dormancy, or
So
maybe not even dormancy, but like quiet accumulation of power. Maybe is a
yeah,
better way to say it. We think.
there you go, there you go. A rebuilding, they're restructuring their
They're going through
how
a
they
corporate
run their company.
restructuring. That's
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
They had
but
to file bankruptcy, and yeah,
but
going
they're
through
not,
receivership is tough.
and they're not trading publicly anymore. So
Yeah, they're no longer listed on the S&P 500.
and so
And yes,
it
their stock symbol is uh, STH. So
STH.
I know you were wondering.
I kind of didn't need to know. Um, we've only ever had Star Wars really in this Jedi versus Sith sort of association. Um, and there's been a few novels that are less direct in that. Like there's some stuff that goes so far back that like the Sith aren't even a thing, but they're still like the dark side.
Yeah,
um which I think there will be some dark side, you know they'll touch on that, I think, in these stories,
yeah.
but we
Which I
have.
mean, we've already gotten a little bit of that with stuff like the Night Sisters.
Yeah,
Dark side, you know, entities that have their own, mythos and all this kind of stuff.
yeah,
Um, but aren't Sith.
yeah, exactly. And but for this, they're bringing in something that at least so far has not been associated with being a based villain, and that's the Nile, Nihl, which for some of you expanded universe people out there might remember Darth Nihilus. Woot woot, up to my Nihilus fans.
Come on, baby.
um
Yeah, people are postulating already that we might be introduced to a Darth Nihilus, which, you know, who knows? But
yeah, could be a possibility.
um, yeah, it
uh,
seems like it's not a force sensitive group
mm-hmm.
potentially.
Yeah.
So let's not dive too far into that with our hopes and dreams. I don't think.
You're right, right. I kind of see this as, so they talked about how, like, at this time, a great deal of the galaxy has been explored, but there's still some of that going on. I mean, even up to Rise of Skywalker, the unknown regions are unknown.
Unknown. Yeah.
Unknown. And so, yeah, I imagine at this point in time, there's still a fair amount of exploration occurring. And it sounds like the Nile are kind of these like space Vikings who basically are kind of going around. They probably come from who knows where, or maybe they come in from kind of the known galaxy, but are basically saying, like, we're going to go out and plunder what we can, and you know claim this part of this planet or whatever. And obviously that's a threat to the Galactic Republic, who's trying to basically, not necessarily do the same, but do it in a peaceful way of like trying to
Yeah.
interconnect to the galaxy.
Well, I think what's interesting is that what we've seen as one of the motivating factors for the storytelling that was given to us was asking the question, what would scare the Jedi?
Yes. And
And so that
besides
is,
physical intimacy.
yeah, yeah. Feeling emotions, definitely something that we should fear. Um, but yeah, so it's like there's going to be something about this group that is like at a core level, like terrifying or fear inducing for the Jedi of this era. So I think
Something
that
maybe
is,
very chaotic. I feel like there's
yeah,
just
that's like a really interesting component. And then something, that they've talked about, with this being kind of like, the High Republic. So like this, cultural zenith or something like that, I guess. You know, it feels very like Greco-Roman stylistically to me.
oh yeah,
Just the way they have them dressed, the ornamental nature, particularly on the front of the cover of is it Light of the Jedi?
yeah,
I think it is.
with
Yeah,
their robes all like
yeah. They've got these almost like ceremonial sets of garb on
yeah.
that is very different than what the Jedi are seen wearing.
It's more capes than cloaks, and
Exactly. And so and like looking at their the hilts on their lightsabers and stuff, it's more ornamental and it's less practical in a way. There's a
yeah,
lot of like ergonomic reality to the lightsabers that we see being utilized consistently in the prequel through sequel trilogies, and it looks like there is some like just like creative beauty with the way the Jedi are presented here. So I'm kind of wondering if they're in an era of just kind of like being a somewhat benign peacekeeping force. They have a physical presence throughout the galaxy, specifically on Coruscant. And maybe they go and have like little nice meetings with different systems. But for the most part, things are pretty calm, and so
yeah,
they're able to kind of like have this period of like Renaissance art almost
yeah.
manifesting in the way that they
That's a neat
dress and the
idea.
way things are designed. You look at a lot of like armor that was built and designed during the Renaissance period, and it's not really armor that was always designed for wear and use
Yeah,
because of whatever reason, and so it's more ornamental.
it was something they
um,
still knew that they needed, but had the time to like make it a little nicer, kind
Exactly.
of thing. Yeah,
And so it'll still do the job, but we're going to put some like really beautiful filigree on here, and it seems like we're getting some of that aesthetic from the limited amounts of artwork that we've already been given, which I
yeah.
think is really
Oh,
cool.
it's beautiful
I'm excited to get to see the legs be stretched a little bit in that capacity.
for sure, for sure. So, thinking here's my tangent. As this announcement was made, I started to get into thinking like about the Jedi Order and its relationship to the Republic, and tried to think of that in a modern sense to where we the time that we live in and stuff. And I was like, I would love to have a conversation with an economist about the reality behind like funding something like the Jedi Order. Like, okay, the temple ain't cheap. You have thousands of people, you know, living in this building, traveling to all parts of the galaxies at a drop of a hat, that have, all sorts of transportation that need to be
Yeah, like
fed.
did the Jedi have lobbyists in the Senate voting for tax,
Yeah,
increases so that they can get, a new set of robes for all the Jedi? I don't
yeah.
know.
And I'm thinking, I'm like, okay, well, we have seen um in books and stuff, in the even at the time of like when the Jedi are very prolific, that there are people who still perceive them as like a religious sect. So obviously there's got to be some sort of sense of like separation of church and state kind of thing going on. And like I would actually would find of this is us getting older in our our franchise,
Well, what do the taxes
of
look like?
yeah. I'm like, I would love to have a book that yes has some adventure to it, but also focuses on like, yeah, the reality of like how the Jedi Order is sustained.
I want to know more about these political parties. What do they call their left wing people?
Right. People say there's too much politics in the Phantom Menace. Well, I beg to differ. I
What if
need to
we
know. I need to
increased
know
it?
more.
I want to know how a bill gets passed.
Right, right. So okay, and then my other kind of go off from this. This is less tangential and more just like I wonder what's going to happen with this. So we have like so far we have no sort of central characters of any kind. It's we have a time period. What do you think is going to be like? We've Star Wars was built on basically three core characters. If you look at it,
Oh, I thought you were going to
at
say
least,
rock and roll.
yeah. um, Han, Luke, and Leia. That's kind of like our core thing. And then you can look at 3PO, R2, Chewbacca, Vader as kind of and Kenobi as kind of these, like basis characters. And so I'm wondering, like, is there going to be some through line characters in this content? Or are we going to be focusing more on an era rather than some central, players in this? I'm sure there'll be some crossover in general, but what are your thoughts on that? Where are we going to have a main thread, or do you think it's all just kind of like looking at the different threads as they make the whole
Yeah.
blanket, as it were?
Um, I think, and this is obviously based on like such a
We know not much.
like a very narrow set of facts that have been given to us so far.
Mm-hmm.
My expectation is that we are going to have a set of novels and comics that are based out of two central um, kind of like starting points, I guess. So we will have
Yeah.
um, a Jedi High Republic centric set of story that is going to be based out of Coruscant, the Jedi Temple, and then what's the name of the space station that's going to have?
Yeah, I know. I can't
Um,
remember the name of it, but I know what you're talking about.
yeah, I don't. Maybe I'll be able to find it here in a second. But I think it's going to be based out of those two areas, and I think we're going to
Mm-hmm.
have um, a set of Jedi who are going out into the galaxy and having adventures out of both of those locations. But then I think we're also going to get to see some of what Jedi Academy life is like. I think
Mm-hmm.
we're going to get to see what is going on politically between the Jedi um, and the Republic, because that's something that obviously is kind of
In the
had a
name, yeah,
weird
yeah.
turn by the time we get to it in the original trilogy. Not to mention, the prequels more
Mm-hmm.
particularly. Um, and so I think that those are pretty obvious ways that we're going to get interaction in the High Republic era, because fills out it fills out the storyline that we got, um, and gives us some of the background of what it would have looked like in an era where things weren't so volatile or so volatile.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if I can learn how to talk, and so I think that's one set. Of stories we'll get, and it'll kind of like come out of those physical locations with multiple groups where we've got in a way it's similar to the EU, um, and in that like in what we were getting in Legends books back in the day. It's like we have the Wedge storyline with all the X-wing pilots. We've got Luke going off and training Jedi, but then we've also got Luke going on adventures without his trainees. Then we have stories with his trainees going out and doing things. So like we've got these like common touch
Yeah,
points. But then it's going out and exploring these different groups of people who have different purposes within this existence. And I think that this will be similar. So like we'll have some crossover with some characters who are kind of like common threads, basically, so that we have a feeling
yeah,
of being grounded within this new era. But those will be like probably people who are located on this space station or located on Coruscant at the Jedi Temple. like a librarian, or people who are on the Jedi Council or something like that.
Yeah.
And then those will be the places of overlap. And then we're going to be getting the Nihil, however we're going to end up saying it, who are coming from a different place, and we're going to get these, to start off, bits and pieces of what they're doing, and we're going to know that they're coming, and the Jedi are woefully unaware, until it's almost too late, basically. And then there's going to be this concerted effort on the Jedi side to catch up, figure out what's going on, and combat it. Whereas the Nihil are going to be, this agent of chaos or whatever, to ultimately have to push back against. And I think that it would make a heck of a lot of sense for the movies to the next movies to have some grounding in this, because it'll help them set the stage for the fans like us, those of us making podcasts and those listening
Yeah.
to them, because we'll have become aware of what's going on. And then there'll be movies that can stand alone, obviously, but they'll have a deeper richness
Connection.
because of
Yeah.
what we've been already given in these books and novels. And so that's kind of what
Hmm.
I expect the arc is going to be going forward.
Yeah. So my kind of final thought on what we know now and what we don't know, is being that we're only 200 years back. I've only thought of three characters that could make any sort of appearance, really, that we kind of have, at least a pretty good idea of ages and stuff. And that would obviously be Yoda being one of them, since he's 900 when he passes away. Another is Maz, because she's like at least 1,000 years old from what we
Yeah,
know. And then
supposedly.
the
I
other
always feel
is,
like Maz is a little bit of an unreliable not narrator, so I'm not really sure exactly how old she is. So
well, and part of that comes from technically the castle that she inhabits has been there for like 1,000 years, but she necessarily hasn't always been there.
I'm very curious to know what's going on with her. But yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, I interrupted.
Oh,
Continue.
you're fine. You're fine. And then the third is, if you remember, and to this will kind of connect us to where we're headed next, is in the Clone Wars. Hu Yang, I believe his character's name. David Tennant voices him. He's the droid that is on the ship that ferries
That's
apprentices
true.
to Ilum, and he's been doing that for hundreds of generations. And on the cover of A Test of Courage, one of the YA novels, there's a
Yep.
droid that looks pretty darn close to his character.
Yeah,
Um,
super, super similar. Yeah.
so, I
I
mean,
mean, that's the expectation, right?
yeah,
So
droids are a dime a dozen, but
it seems very intentional,
it does seem very intentional considering that character's history. So,
and it's not a droid type that we've really seen hanging out in other places. I don't think
yeah, I
so.
think the only other appearance we've seen of a droid of similar stature is actually one at Maz's castle.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
um, which actually is in Force Collector. That droid is mentioned, and she's kind of like an assistant droid to Maz, and apparently she's been there for like she's an outdated model that's been there for
Yeah.
many years. So speaking of Clone Wars, we'll get back to the Clone Wars. This week we got our first new episode. We talked about this before, but I totally forgot that they're going week by week
So did I.
on release, and so part of me was just like, I didn't even have the time to binge um, the day on Friday when the episodes dropped. But a little part of me was disappointed that I couldn't too.
Yeah, I basically had the exact same experience. I got done with the first one, and I was like, okay, I need to like keep working on some stuff, and so I couldn't have watched the second one at the time. But when I saw that I couldn't, I like got frustrated. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about this. But I was like definitely a little miffed.
Yeah,
So yeah, I was like kind of glad that I couldn't just like eat through it too quickly, but also a little frustrated,
yeah, for
if
sure.
I'm going to be honest.
Well, and part of it too is like, so the first episode, Bad Batch, um, is not something that's strange to us because a few years after um, Clone Wars was canceled, they released, I think it was like 3 or 4 episodes um, on StarWars.com in their infancy, which were basically like really crude animations with, voiceover and, you know, not much else. And Bad Batch was one of those episodes, one of those arcs in that series. So a lot of people are already very familiar with this episode, you know, how it plays out and everything. So it's not like there was any surprises in this episode. If you follow, you know, for those very attuned to it, there was nothing necessarily new that we got here other than the sleek, sexy look of this final season, which it is quite beautiful.
Yeah, I would agree. It was
It's
it was like really nice to to come back to new episodes of the Clone Wars, because it really is, out of the animated stories that we've gotten to see, the most beautiful, and I think it's the richest visually out of all of them.
well, I think what's so cool about, like, I mean, we had animatics for this episode, so you get an idea, but you don't, kind of even fully see the vision sometimes. But you can see, even just in this first episode, that, like, we're pulling out all the stops for this final season. Like, there's some shots and stuff that you're just like, season one, you wouldn't have seen anything like that.
No, no.
Like, there's that first, like, sweeping shot coming into the base at the beginning of the episode that, like, is passing in between soldiers and ships flying by and stuff. And it's like, we would never have seen a shot with that many assets in it and stuff like that. It's just like, it's very cinematic. It's beautiful. Um, great way to start the season off, really, I felt. And I don't, I mean, I remember watching this and I don't remember it super well. Um, and again, this is a kid's show, at its core. Um, I think one of the critiques I have of this episode is, when Rex is like in, um, like the bunks, and he's like looking at the pictures of Heavy and Fives and Echo and stuff, and he's kind of reminiscing on the soldiers lost. It bugs me a little bit that he's just like, I mean, maybe this is trying to show like the force in um, beings, despite them being clones, um, of him, being like, no, I know he's still out there, kind of thing. Like,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
I don't know why that kind of irks me. Like, I think I would almost enjoy the surprise of the character returning if we didn't have him sort of telegraphing that, idea from the get-go.
Yeah, I agree. It is a little bit like unusual, um, that he would be feeling something that would like make him think that Echo's alive.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I understand for kids that kind of want to be like preparing them for this character to show up again, type of thing. Um, and but that's just me. Although that now makes me think, I think a really cool side story for a book or something would be a clone that, for whatever reason, was force sensitive, and the stories that could be told there.
It would
I think
be very interesting.
I think it'd be very, very cool. Yeah.
That would be, I think, a really great comic book.
Yeah. So, had you previously watched this episode?
I had not.
The
I have
crude
not.
version. Okay, so you hadn't. So what would you think?
I liked it. I enjoy the Bad Batch. I think it's a fun play on the clones, and
Hmm.
in some ways it's and I hate the context that this phrase has, or like this like way to identify it, but it's like a filler episode in some ways because it doesn't
Hmm.
have our heroes in it. Does not have Ahsoka, does not have Anakin, doesn't have Obi-Wan, and so it feels a little bit like parallel to our main driving force, and for us
Yeah.
to get it as the first episode of the new season. um, I was talking to somebody about that, and they were like, I was a little disappointed we got a filler episode as the first one, and I was like, well, I guess I hadn't really thought about it that way.
Yeah.
But it kind of is. But also, the clones have become, after 6 seasons, a really beloved
Yeah.
group
Some of
of
them are.
characters, and so their like status as fillers, I think, is maybe at this point um, pretty far past that. This um, this is not a Meber Gascon droid
Yeah.
adventure in a wasteland that you're like, okay, so basically they just wanted to save some money for a couple episodes. We have no background. It's just like dust,
And and
and
hopefully the kids
they're
will forget how dark the other episodes have been.
yeah, like okay, let's move on, please. And so it's not like we started with that. I'd be a little ticked if we had
Yeah.
started there.
Yeah.
But I, was thinking about it, I guess in a different light after I had this conversation. I was like, okay, I can kind of see, how you would want to see Ahsoka and Anakin at least, if not Obi-Wan as well here.
Yeah.
So,
And we see
I
them
wasn't
for,
disappointed, but I can understand why somebody would be a little bit let down on that point.
yeah, you get them for a minute or so at the top of the episode, and yeah, but that's it. Um, and I mean, it is the Clone Wars, so obviously they're a key component of the show. So yeah, you do want to build character out of them, and for me, like Rex, um, I've always absolutely loved Rex, and I think Cody's always been an interesting character to me too, because much like Anakin, um, Anakin is a far more, I think, tortured soul in that sense of his downfall. But like, and Cody doesn't really have the choice necessarily. But like, it's weird thinking of this character. It's like, yeah, one day he's just gonna turn on everybody, all of his friends, and so having Cody and Rex are characters that I love to follow. And then I think it's, yeah, you could perceive it as a filler episode, but I think um, having these new, just like fun characters to just kind of like jump back into things and like, yeah, this show is so awesome. Like, I
Yeah.
missed it.
Well, it
And
felt like it had like just gotten done while I was watching it, which is, part and parcel of getting to binge it whenever you feel like it,
yeah,
streaming somewhere. Um, but it really did feel like, I was just like putting on an old pair of shoes that I had on yesterday.
yeah,
So, like, yeah, maybe it was, not in the throes of some sort of, like battle between, Grievous and Anakin or something like that.
yeah.
But I mean, dude,
Whoa, Grievous and Anakin never face off during the Clone Wars, my friend.
I know, well, that we've seen. Um, but yeah, it's like, um, you never know what they can retcon, Travis. Uh, it's not like it hasn't happened before.
They actually said they very specifically made sure that they never saw each other.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because
I don't remember seeing that.
it's mentioned in Revenge of the Sith, that when they at the Battle of Coruscant, that's the first time that they meet. And so there's plenty of battles where like they're both present but never face each other.
Yeah. Well, if there's one thing I know, it's that just because we have facts in a movie, that doesn't mean later on it can't change. Um,
Yeah,
which is one of my favorite things about Star Wars. But yeah, so anyway, it's like I don't even remember what I was saying at this point.
sorry, I ruined it. I had to actually you.
Well, actually, which I will say, my favorite well, actually, I've ever gotten, I think I've talked about this before, was when I got to well, actually, my astronomy professor,
Yeah.
uh, very first semester, freshman year of college. Um, or maybe, well, maybe it was my second semester, but I think he was really crestfallen when he got well, actually, because he had to find a new illustration.
Yeah. I mean, what can you do? Speaking of the Kessel Run, I fell asleep. So, for whatever reason, I can put on solo a Star Wars story like any time of day. Um, and
For what do you mean for whatever reason? Is it
for
because it's a really good movie?
it is,
because yeah,
I freaking love it, and for that reason, I can just like have it on anytime, and so like I fall asleep to it a lot. I've also been falling asleep to the Ewok Adventures a lot lately.
of course you have.
That I'll turn on Battle for Endor or something and just fall asleep to Wilford Brimley. But um,
I just, I actually have an audiobook of Wilford Brimley just reading the dictionary, and that's what I listen to every night when I go to bed. Is that not normal? Is that wrong to do?
it's good. It's good stuff. Um, I don't remember where I was going with what I was trying to say about. So, oh, the Kessel Run. Um, nope, I don't even remember why I got there.
I was talking about how I well actually my astronomy professor,
Yes,
and then you were like, "Oh, I've been watching Solo
Castle
a
Run.
lot."
I think that might have just been it. Oh, realizing I think just in general that's become one of my like top three favorite Star Wars movies. Like, I really like that movie.
Oh wow.
That's gonna be. I know that's like uh, that may be a hot topic, but
Well,
that's
I
just how
mean,
I
I
feel about it.
remember my first reaction to seeing it, and this is back when Jen Marie was still with us. Um, was that like I wanted it immediately to be out streaming because I wanted to
Yeah,
watch it every day. It's just it starts and I mean it is flying the entire time. There are a couple points where it kind of slows down so you can catch your breath and like you know take a second to like think about what's going on, and then it really starts going again. There aren't, in my opinion, stretches that you're like, okay, like let's fast forward through this because I've
yeah.
seen this 40 times
Even
or something.
even the lulls are still important to you.
Yeah, but yeah. So I mean I totally agree. I don't know that I would say it's my top three, um, but in terms of like rewatchability, if that's the metric, it's one
Yeah,
of the easiest to just throw on and like jump into any portion of the movie at any time and just like go for the ride.
for sure, for sure. So I realize we've kind of we really extended our High Republic conversation, and that's totally okay because it was something new and it's something we needed to talk about. Um, as because oftentimes we kind of let new stuff go by the wayside. Um, but we are going to return to the Clone Wars um, next time, and specifically the Mortis arc. It's episodes 16, 17, and 18
Yeah,
in
baby.
season 3. Um, Overlords, Altar of Mortis, and what's the last one? Something of Mortis. Yeah,
The third episode in that stretch is called
I said it earlier. I don't
Ghosts
know
of
why.
Mortis.
Ghosts of Mortis. There you go. Um, and I watched a video yesterday of somebody who had put some concept art and I guess original of their own original or somebody's new other original concept art to a section of the Trevorrow script. Which, yes, I'm bringing us back to some dangerous territory here.
Yeah, this is dangerous territory. The
the
purported Trevorrow script.
purported, yes, the purported Trevorrow script, um, in which um, Kylo uh, goes to Mustafar, and what he is actually there to look for is a holocron. And the holocron, I guess, basically, there's some things in the Trevorrow script that don't seem, you know, too wildly disconnected from what we got. You know, this is a similar idea already off the bat that he's looking for something to take him some like he needs an object to direct him to something. And I guess that this holocron basically was going to sort of lead him to Mortis or have some secrets about Mortis, um, that that he was searching for, and that Palpatine had left a message for Vader to go exploring for it. Which there's actually kind of that in some ways would have been a nice, interesting connection because if you look at it, okay, Exegol, something completely new, all that was brand new to every person watching it,
Yeah.
whether you were in the fandom or had just seen the movies. Like Exegol, brand new. To that extent, Mortis could have been the introduced thing on screen that for the average goer could have experienced and would have had no problem following along. But for other fans like us, would have had a deeper connection to it. And when you look at the deeper lore of things, we've been watching this arc and talking about discussing it, about how uh, this continues into Star Wars Rebels and um, Palpatine's quest for the world between worlds, and how the father, son, and daughter kind of connect to all that too, and how I think that would have been a very unique connection to make. You could almost keep most everything that's going on in the Rise of Skywalker, but maybe shift that connection just a little bit. I think would have been interesting in
Uh-huh.
Palpatine's like quest for extending his life. That could have been kind of the thing that he was partially looking for, and using the world between worlds as a bit of a um, communicational place for like Rey and the other Jedi, perhaps. I think could have been interesting, just to make things a little more mystical, time travel-y, you know? Just a
I
thought,
do know.
just a thought I had. So I absolutely love the movie that we got. Um, but yeah, every once in a while there's going to be an idea that you're just like, that's a pretty cool idea. So
Well, I think that part of the issue, when we're getting into this stuff that exists not in just the films, drawing parallels,
yeah,
and then, pulling nuggets of that information over, it just gets more complicated and
oh
more
for sure,
difficult because of how in depth and complex it is, to lay the foundation for some of this really rich information. So I understand why we got what we got, and I think that for the purpose of those being the films, um, it's probably impractical to do some of these things that it's like, okay, for us that would be absolutely freaking phenomenal to
yeah,
go in and
yeah.
explore more of that stuff. But whether it's people like my wife or my dad or my brother-in-law or whomever else who enjoys seeing the Star Wars movies, but have never picked up a comic book, a movie, that's not one of the feature length films,
I'm not
whether
going to
it's
tell your wife that you underestimated her.
No, it's not a matter of underestimating. It's a matter of knowing reality. Um, I mean, none of them have ever, delved into this kind of stuff. And so I'm like, okay, well, they would be, automatically left by the wayside if they, took some of these avenues. And so while
Yeah,
for
for
us,
sure.
for sure, it would be more, rich and textured. Um, I don't know how you do it and keep it to a 2.5, 3 hour movie,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
but it would
think
be
still at the
freaking
end of the
sweet.
day, like I think uh, the people who hate the biggest on the movie hate on like character arcs, and
Yeah,
those are the things I'm
yeah,
most okay with. It's like, yeah, I would have changed maybe the setting of this thing, or how we got from A to B, but it's like, you know most of the people we're dealing with are the Raylos and the and
well,
the
I don't want to like
hashtag Ben
hate.
deserved better
Yeah,
kind
like
of
I don't want
thing.
to like hate on those people
Oh, I
because
don't either.
like I
They're fans
like
too.
that.
They
Yeah,
deserve it.
like I like that they're passionate about it, and they have
Yeah.
ideas, and I just I'm of the opinion that uh, their perspective is skewed, and that they let them. And this is painting with a very broad brush, but I think a fair number of people, particularly that I've run across online, who are Raylos, um, have lost sight of the fact that like just because they like the idea of a certain relationship happening in a certain way, that doesn't mean it's right, and it doesn't mean it's the best way to do it. It doesn't even mean it's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
And we've talked a lot about there being stakes for the main characters and how important that is. That that there is a set of consequences that could befall you, whether things go good or bad, and ultimately, whether it's people claiming that Kylo is abusive, and that the Raylos are perverted for wanting Ray to be in an abusive relationship with Ben, or it's Raylos saying that the only viable story arc was for them to be in a relationship with one another, and have this Cinderella Prince Charming kind of existence from here on out.
Yeah.
I think they've both missed the mark, and I don't think either side of that argument is correct. Um, I have muted a lot of people on Twitter on both sides of that argument. Uh, so it's not that I'm on one side or the other. It's that I think that they've equally gotten lost in the weeds on this point,
Yeah.
and I can't, however many months after the fact it is now, I cannot continue to see that in my timeline without having like an aneurysm. So
Yeah. Well, in less than 3 weeks, we will be able to watch that film at home in the comfort of our underwear, or however you wish to view the rise of Skywalker. Yippee!
the comfort of my underwear.
Yeah, we're not sponsored by MeUndies or anything like every other podcast.
But hey, me undies.
Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Again, we will be returning to the Clone Wars, but since the Clone Wars are weekly episodes, we will be touching on each of those episodes as well. So, a lot more Clone Wars content coming at you. So you can expect a lot of brush up on your Mortis arc. It's a good set of episodes. It's good stuff. Sam Witwer. I mean, you can't go wrong with the Witwer. He's good stuff, man. Love that Witwer. Witwer. I'm just gonna say Witwer. Um, Thank you for listening. Um, I hope you know where else to discover us at Force Cult on most other social media platforms. I am at AK Star Wars Kid on all of those other platforms as well. Jip he's a little more, keeps things close to the chest at Darth Legalis on Twitter. Although, being that we have some announcements, he likes to, go traipsing elsewhere.
Yeah, I've been spending an awful lot of time on message boards complaining about the outcome of the Oscars. I don't really have any opinions, but I just like to disagree with people. So if you go to oscarshate.net,
Mm.
you can find me on their message boards.
Chip, it just sounds like you're kind of being a bit of a parasite on those websites.
Well, I've got my knives out and I'm ready for a fight.
There you go. You remind me of this Irishman I once knew. You trying to think of another one?
That's racist.
Well, once again, we'll remind you this is a Star Wars podcast, but we can't contain ourselves. We are. See, I don't know. I got nothing there.
We come from a generation of people that everything was movie quotes and references from like middle school until like 4 or 5 years after we graduated from college. Like that's all we did.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we still do because
That's what
that
we're
was
still doing.
when our personalities were like set in concrete. So sorry
Right.
to anybody who's younger than us, but that's just the way we are.
You handle me
Okay,
the way
millennial.
you are. Okay, boomer. I have to give a shout out to our good buddy Ryan, um, who I was staying with this past week up in the Dallas Fort Worth area,
You lucky duck.
and he's a good friend of ours. He took me to, if you live in the Dallas Fort Worth area or visiting the Dallas Fort Worth area, there's a place called Order 66 Toys. That is a purely Star Wars collectibles store. And I think we spent literally just an hour in there, like the last hour before they closed. And I was just like walking around giving Ryan like fun facts about either the character on screen or behind the scenes or the production of the actual toy or something like that. That was just all
That's
we did.
awesome.
It was a lot of fun. And I love hate places like that because like you get to see some really cool pieces, and then you look at the price tag that they put on it and you're like, well, I'm not leaving with that. So
Yeah, for real.
so I ended up walking away with a Power of the Force series Max Rebo band set that has Joe Yowza from the special edition and Size Noodles.
That
So
is so great.
I
Well
said,
done.
what would be the almost most ironic set of figures for me to buy from this place? As I'm sure the guys who were working there was like, of all this, and this guy bought these these like hotly debated and somewhat hated characters from the special
Yeah,
edition.
so funny. Hey, so do
But
you have any Zuvios?
yeah, right. I don't know if they did. I don't remember seeing if they had any Zuvios. No, they did have a Zuvio, and they had I think it was still marked up like $18 or something like that. And then he the next night he took me to a pop-up Star Wars themed bar. Um, so they had a bunch of really cool art and props and stuff floating around in there, and themed drinks. And as I'm sure a lot of people have been seeing, like this baby Yoda cocktail going around on Instagram and stuff like that, that they had an equivalent of that, and they had one of the display Millennium Falcons from like Toys R Us there. I'm sure they get asked collectors and stuff to donate to these kind of things but it was, I want to say about maybe about 4+ feet in length. It was big. It was big size Falcon.
That's awesome.
Um, yeah, so they had it hanging up, but cool place, good stuff, good times. And Ryan and I got into a conversation about one of their menu items was called the Jabba Juice. But as we both know, the common drink in the Star Wars galaxy is Jawa juice. So
Yep.
yeah. And Ryan was like, "Oh, I'm gonna go order the Jawa juice and see if he corrects me." I was like, "It's too loud in here. I don't think they're gonna know the
Yeah, they would have
difference."
no idea.
Nor do they probably care. But thanks for that, buddy.
Sweet.
Had a jolly good time with you. So, and I had a jolly good time with you this last hour, my friend.
As did I.
Woohoo! Well, to all of our listeners and those we're reaching out to with the Force, may the Force be with you. Join the cult and have a great day.
Snoodles!